Alright, let's see how this looks. It's not too bad! Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG, welcome to another Commander Deck Tech. In today's video, we're keeping it Marvel. Today we're looking at Iron Man, Titan of Innovation. It is 3 blue and a red for a 4/4 legendary creature human hero. It has Flying, Haste, and Genius Industrialist, which means whenever Iron Man attacks, create a treasure token. Then you may sacrifice a non-creature artifact. If you do, search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1, plus the sacrifice artifact's mana value. You put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So, I think Tony Stark here is a really cool and interesting commander, with a lot of different ways that you can take him. The way I want to take the deck is to lean into the strengths of the card as much as possible. What Iron Man does is firstly rewards us for attacking, by not only making us a treasure that we can use as some bonus ramp, but also letting us cash in a non-creature artifact to go and get something better. If you sacrifice the treasure, you can go and get a 1-drop and put it into play. If you sacrifice a 7-drop, you can go and get an 8-drop and put that into play. That is really good. There's a ton of awesome artifacts out there with very strong enter the battlefield effects that you can tutor up with Iron Man, get the value out of it one combat, and then cash it in the next time he attacks to get something else. While we can only ever sacrifice non-creature artifacts, we can tutor up any kind of artifact with Iron Man, which importantly does include creatures. That flexibility to get things out of our deck is extremely strong. Just swinging in with Iron Man the turn it comes into play, and turning the treasure it makes into a soul ring is kind of really good. Or even just swinging in and shooting up an Aether Spellbomb to bounce an opponent's best creature, or a Relic of Progenitus if we need to answer an opponent's graveyard, or even we can just get a Skull Clamp if we want to draw some cards. That flexibility is just awesome. That will mean that a lot of the artifacts in this deck will just be 1 mana, as being able to get them with Iron Man whenever we attack will be incredibly good. A cool thing that we're going to be including in this build will be equipment that equips itself to a creature when it comes into play. When I think of Iron Man, I think of him upgrading new versions of his suit, or bits of his suit flying in and attaching themselves to him. And that is actually something we're going to be doing in this deck with these cards. Oh, but wait, there is another way that we can get value out of Iron Man, and that's because there are a bunch of artifacts that reward us when we sacrifice artifacts. Be it cards that want to be sacked themselves, or other effects that care about other artifacts going to the graveyard. By adding these to the deck, we get extra value when the artifacts come in, and when they go out. What this all means is that this is going to be an artifact toolbox deck with a Voltron sub-theme. We're going to be using artifacts for all portions of the deck, including suiting up Iron Man into a lethal threat. But on top of that, we're going to be wanting to get as many artifacts into play as possible, because we're going to be running a bunch of awesome cards that reward us for doing just that. In terms of our game plan, early on we're going to be doing whatever we can to get Iron Man onto the board as quickly as possible. While we're doing this, we're going to be setting the groundwork by playing a bunch of artifacts that want to be sacrificed, or cards that reward us from sacking artifacts. In the mid-game when Iron Man is out, he's going to be getting into combat straight away. Ideally, we'll be turning that treasure into something that buffs him up, but if we have to, we'll get an answer or whatever piece we are missing to help out our game plan, like ramp, interaction, or card draw. One of the best things about this deck is there are a bunch of different ways that we can actually win the game. We first have the good old hit them for 21 points of commander damage way of taking out a player. But then because this deck is also making so many artifacts, we can run cards that reward us for all that hard work. For example, with creatures that get massive when we have a bunch of artifacts in play. Or we can animate those smaller artifacts into a lethal threat. Before we move on, a quick note on how this video will work. We don't give full deck lists in this series, rather we break down the deck into all the different sections that the deck needs to function. We'll then tell you how many cards to run in each section and give you a bunch of options and suggestions for you to pick from. This way you can make the deck work for you, your playstyle, and your budget. Talking of budget, if you're thinking of picking up cards for this deck, please consider using our TCG Player affiliate link down in the description below. Using it helps the channel grow, and we greatly appreciate it and love you all. The first section I want to go over is ways of getting value from sacrificing artifacts. We're talking about this first, as ideally these are the kind of things we're getting into play before Iron Man comes down, so they are there, ready to go. The first of these effects are cards that help us ramp and hit our land drops. Cards like Mycosynth Wellspring and Prize Statue are great in the deck, as we can bring them in to get us either a land or a treasure, and then when Tony comes out to party, we can sack them to go and get an impactful 3-drop artifact. We then have effects that can draw some extra cards. Ichor Wellspring is by far the best of the bunch, but by running Chromatic Star, Terrarion and Wizard's Rockets, they're really going to help us cycle and filter through our deck to get us to the bits that we need. We then have cards like Nimblewright and Servo Schematic. These both make us some nice creature bodies, ready to block and protect our life total. On top of that, they just add to our artifact count, which will become really relevant when we get to our win cons. We then have some effects that reward us when we sacrifice artifacts. A card like Esoteric Duplicator is a great example of this. This makes it so that whenever we sacrifice it or another artifact, we can pay 2 mana to make a copy of it at the end of turn. Perfect for getting back something we've just sacked to Iron Man. You then have a card like Scrap Trawler. This makes it so that whenever an artifact we control goes to the graveyard, we can return an artifact with lesser mana value from our graveyard to our hand. What this basically means is that with Iron Man out doing its thing, we get to return an artifact back to our hand every turn, ready for us to get more value out of it. That could be the thing we sacrificed the turn before, or something else as well. You then have a card like Slagstone Refinery, which when it or another non-token artifact goes to the bin from play, we get a tapped Power Stone. With all the artifacts we want to cast in this deck, this really can add up to making us a lot of mana. We then have cards like Goblin Welder and Goblin Engineer. These are great little gobbos that let us return artifacts from our graveyard straight into play. They don't care what we sack, so it could be one of the artifacts that we want to go to the bin, or it could be a treasure token, and then we get to return something cool to play. What's great about the Welder especially is it doesn't actually care what we are bringing back. It could be a 1-drop, it could be a 10-drop, a very nuts card. Then lastly in this section we have a card like Terrarion Soulcleaver. This rewards the equipped creature with a +1/+1 counter whenever we sacrifice an artifact or a creature. If we stick this on Iron Man, it'll be growing the whole time we're naturally doing what the deck is wanting to be doing, meaning that he'll be getting nice and huge and very scary. Talking of nice and huge and very scary, the next section to go over is our suit power-ups. These are primarily equipment that over the course of a game upgrade the suit, making it more dangerous. The first section of cards I want to touch on are equipment that automatically equip when they come into play. Why I like these in the deck is that if we tutor them up with Iron Man's ability that remember triggers when it attacks, they will come into play and equip before blocks are declared, and importantly before damage, meaning that they will buff up Iron Man that turn straight away. What's great as well with this, that if we want we can chain them up and up. So the first time Iron Man attacks we can sack the treasure it makes to the ability to get a 1-drop equipment. Then the second time it attacks we can sack the equipment that's already attached to it and go and get a 2-drop equipment. We can do that on and on up the chain. At 1 mana we have cards like Dueling Rapier, Hidden Footblade, Mirran Banesplitter, Sigh of the Shinobi and Utility Knife. I'd personally pick 2 or 3 of these as they are mainly here to start the chain. But because we always have access to them because they only cost a single mana, because we can always sack the treasure Iron Man makes to go and get them, having a couple in the deck will be really nice. At 2 mana we have cards like Hidden Blade, Javelin of Lightning, Relic Axe and Scavenged Blade. Of these I would only pick 1 or 2, and the ones that give first strike would be my preference. The others are still solid here, and importantly they're incredibly cheap to buy as well. We get a bit more variety at 3 mana with cards like Assassin's Gauntlet, Grifter's Blade, Mithril Coat, Piston Sledge and Quick Draw Dagger. These all do some cool and interesting things. Here I really like Assassin's Gauntlet, as tapping down all of someone's creatures could just win us the game, and then Mithril Coat is a great way of protecting Iron Man, so it's always around for the rest of the game. I think those are awesome, but like previously, any of them are solid options, with the rest of them also being incredibly cheap to buy. At 4 mana, we have probably the best card for this strategy in the deck, with Hammer of Nazahn. It comes in, buffs up Iron Man's power, and protects it by making it indestructible. Then, on top of auto-equipping itself, it makes every other equipment that we either cast or put into play by other means automatically equipped to a creature we control. That is honestly nuts, because the rest of the equipment we're going to be running are really going to push Iron Man into a deadly threat. And being able to auto-equip because of the hammer is going to be stupid. Honestly, this is probably one of the best cards in the deck. After those, we have a bunch of equipment that are really only here to make Iron Man hit like a truck. Cards like Blackblade Reforged and Loxodon Warhammer add a ton of power to our commander. So does a card like Nettlecyst, which has incredible upside in an artifact deck like this, as it will honestly make Iron Man immensely powerful. Then you have cards that give double strike, like Fireshrieker and Embercleave, making taking out an opponent twice as easy. The fact that Embercleave also auto-equips when it comes in is also really nice. For some extra added synergy in the deck, you have cards like Magnetic Theft and Brass Squire. These importantly can also allow us to attach equipment at instant speed, which means we can cheat those equipment onto Iron Man the turn they come into play without having to pay their equip costs. Next up is our card draw section. This will overlap with some of the cards we've already mentioned, but in total in the deck we're looking for somewhere between 10 to 12 bits to make the deck function. First up we have Idol of Oblivion. I absolutely love this card. And in this deck, with our commander that's making a treasure token every turn, it basically means with the idol, we're drawing an extra card every turn. You then have Skull Clamp, which is great at turning some dorky Servos or Thopters into 2 lovely cards. It's always solid in any deck that can make use of it, but especially in this deck, as we can tutor it up, it's going to be fantastic. While not exactly card advantage, the filtering is still really nice on a card like Currency Converter. Just being able to loot every turn is going to be really good. And then the added creature tokens it makes is also going to be really nice. You then have a card like Eye of Vecna, a solid artifact that replaces itself when it enters, and then gives us the option to pay 2 mana to draw some extra lovely cards on our upkeep. You could also consider running some vehicles here that also help with some card draw and filtering. You have things like Reckoner Bankbuster that can just draw us some cards and make us some pilot tokens, and then you have Smuggler's Copter, which just helps filter through the deck and is always a solid option. For some more expensive options, you have things like Bident of Thassa and the Indomitable. These are cool coastal piracy effects that draw us a card whenever a creature, like for example a Flying Commander, deals combat damage to a player. These definitely get better if you're making more Thopters in the deck. Talking of Thopters, we next have Breya's Apprentice. This makes us a Thopter when it comes into play, but can then cash it in or some other artifacts for a bunch of cool effects. Importantly for the card draw section, the ability to exile the top card of our library and play that card that turn is going to be really nice. We then have effects like Thoughtcast and Thought Monitor, which draw us a couple of cards, but also importantly have their mana reduced equal to the number of artifacts that we control. For a 1-card engine for those lucky enough to own one, you then have the One Ring. It'll draw us so many cards over the course of a game, and then with Iron Man you can always sacrifice it as well, so we even negate the downside because we're never actually going to die to it. And then while not an artifact, Joyra Weatherlight Captain draws us cards whenever we cast one, which, as that is so much of this deck, will just keep our hand nice and full all throughout the game. We then have Forensic Gadgeteer, which makes us a clue whenever we cast an artifact spell. The fact it also can make us infinite mana with the Basalt Monolith is a nice little combo to have as well that you could consider running, and that gets especially better when we have a tutor in the command zone. We then have an awesome card like Psy Master Thopterist. This can make us so many Thopters over the course of a game, it's honestly going to be nuts. But importantly as well, it also lets us cash in those artifacts to draw some lovely cards. It honestly just does a little bit of everything. You can then top up this section with the finest bits of card draw it has to offer. There's a ton of options in these colours, run what you need here. Next up is our ramp section, and this is going to be fairly big, primarily because this deck really starts working when Iron Man gets into play, and by ramping we can get him out all the sooner. The first place to start here is with some Mana Rocks. These are just fantastic in the deck. They'll come out early and let us cast Iron Man 1 or hopefully 2 turns ahead of curve. Then if we need to, we can always cash them in for an effect that we want. Obviously the best one in the deck is Soul Ring, as we can also find it straight away with Iron Man if we wanted. There's a ton of awesome 2-mana rocks that I would consider as the base for the ramp section. In a deck like this, I would honestly pick at least 8 mana rocks that cost 2 or less mana. On top of that, you can then run some larger rocks, with things like Cursed Mirror and Midnight Clock. The mirror has some nice utility of it also being a tutorable clone effect for the best creature on the board, and then the clock over a couple of turns can quickly turn into a draw 7. We're then back on the equipment train next with the Reaver Cleaver. If we stick it onto our evasive commander, we'll make a bunch of treasure tokens to help out the deck. You can then add to this section with cards that reduce the cost of our artifact spells. Cards like Ethereum Sculptor, Enthusiastic Mechanaut, Foundry Inspector and Cloud Key are all great options, as they can reduce the cost of every artifact that we play in a turn, meaning the amount of mana that they can save us over the course of a game is going to be really high. Then lastly in our ramp section, we have Storm the Vault. The front side will make us a treasure token when a creature deals combat damage to a player. But then, and much more importantly, and why we would consider running it, is it transforms into Vault of Catlacan, which is the closest we're going to be getting to a Terrarion Academy and Commander. A truly awesome land that taps for a blue mana equal to the number of artifacts that we control, which, as we've shown, will make up such a huge amount of the deck, it'll be really easy to flip, and will then tap to make us an extreme amount of mana. Next up is our interaction section. Like with most decks, we're looking for somewhere between 8 to 10 bits here. You're going to want to run more as well the more competitive that your playgroup is. First up, we have Spine of Ishtar, a great artifact that if we cast or cheat into play, destroys any permanent that we want. You then have a card like Legion Extruder, which comes in, it can shock any target, and then becomes a sacrifice outlet that can make us an army of 3/3 golems. For some graveyard hate, you can look at running cards like Relic of Progenitus to nerf that greedy graveyard player out of the game, or a card like Cantopec Scarab Swarm, which can also make us a bunch of artifact tokens as well. For some instant speed interaction, you first have a card like Galvanic Blast, which in this deck is basically 1 mana to deal 4 damage. Well, that is always going to be great. We then have a bunch of great interaction in these colours as well. Cards like Pongify, Rabid Hybridization, Reality Shift and Chaos Warp are all great examples of spells that deal with something scary and then leave something not so scary behind. If you need to, you can top up the section with a bit of efficient burn. Cards like Lightning Bolt and Abrade are much better in games of Commander than people realise. On top of that, you want to add at least 2 board wipes so you can keep what your opponents are doing in check. Cards like Chain Reaction and Blasphemous Act are great budget examples, but there's plenty of other ones out there that you can consider running. Next up, we have a little bit of protection. Our whole deck revolves around our commander, so we really want ways of keeping it around. First up, we have a card like Commander's Plate, an awesome card that we can tutor up straight away with our commander that gives it protection from white, black and green. You can also obviously run Swiftfoot Boots. The bonus hexproof will be really nice so it can dodge some targeted removal. On top of that, we can run some efficient bits of counter magic to stop our opponent's board wipes from landing. There's plenty of cheap counter magic out there, but I really like an offer you can't refuse and Swansong. Moving on, we have a touch of recursion next, as ways of getting back some key spells and effects are always going to be solid. First up, we have Emry, Lurker of the Loch. In this deck, this will basically cost a single blue, and then it sits there, letting us cast an artifact from our graveyard every turn. You then have a Planeswalker like Duretti Scrap Savant. Its plus is some nice filtering, but its -2 is some awesome recursion for any artifact that we want from our graveyard. We then have a little spice next with a card like Gate to the Afterlife, which we can get into play, and then pay 2 and sacrifice it to go and cheat out God Pharaoh's Gift. The God Pharaoh's Gift lets us bring back a creature from our graveyard every turn. That could be a little niche, but I do think it's a really cool little line that we can run in the deck. We then have a pretty beefy bit of recursion next with Portal to Phyrexia. This also gets back a creature from our graveyard into play every upkeep, but the fact there's also a mini board wipe on the way in is also pretty damn awesome. Okay, that's the base of the deck. Let's go over some dedicated ways that we can win the game. First up, we have a card like Hexplate Wallbreaker. This currently is the one artifact we can tutor up in the deck to give us an extra combat step. And while if we tutor up with Iron Man, we will have to wait a turn to get the extra combat step, more combat steps means Iron Man is dishing out more damage and means we have to activate his ability multiple times in a turn. So that means it is worth waiting for. On top of that, you can run 1 or 2 more of these effects. There are permanents that give us extra combat steps with things like Aggravated Assault and Aki Battle Squad, or there are spells that add extra combat steps with cards like Great Train Heist and Seize the Day. Another way in the deck of getting extra combat steps is with taking extra turns. There's a bunch of spells in blue that can do this, but a thematic one for the deck is Ugin's Nexus. As importantly, it's an artifact we can tutor up with Iron Man, but then we can also sacrifice it to get an extra turn. To keep that extra turn train rolling, or just make us copies of some other broken artifacts in the deck, we have cards like Sculpting Steel and Mirrorworks. We're going to be running a lot of cool and very broken artifacts in this deck, so just having more of the best ones is always going to be solid. On the topic of making artifacts, we also have a card like Simulacron Synthesizer. This makes construct tokens whenever an artifact with mana 3 or more enters under our control. That is genuinely really scary, as those tokens will get massive very quickly in this deck, because we're just going to have so many little artifacts running around. We can make more of those artifacts from cards like Academy Manufacturer and World Waker Helm. These both generate us a ton of extra little tokens for all the cards that care about the number of artifacts that we control. Like, for example, Cyberdrive Awakener. This animates all the treasure, all the power stones that the deck has put together, and then importantly turns them into an army of 4/4 flyers. In this deck, this is a Crater Hoof Behemoth. It will just end the game on the spot. It's awesome. Okay, time to bring everything together with our land section, and here we're looking for around 34 to 36 lands to make the deck function. First up, we have Inventor's Fair. A great land that comes into play untapped. It will gain us a couple of life, but then importantly it can then tutor up an awesome artifact for us to use. You then have Urza's Saga, which makes more of those lovely construct tokens and can then tutor up another cool artifact from the deck. We then have cards like Academy Ruins and Buried Ruins for some added artifact recursion. You have a card like Fomori Vault for some added card selection, which could be very strong and dig you very deep in this deck with all the artifacts that we'll have in play. We can up that number of artifacts even higher by running artifact lands. These all count towards the number of artifacts that we're running, and importantly can also be sacrificed to Iron Man. So honestly, I would jam all of these in the deck. We're then going to add as many dual lands that we have that don't come into play tapped as possible. There's plenty of budget ones out there now, you don't need to scrimp here. And then we're going to top the whole thing up with somewhere between 12 and 20 basic lands, and we should be good to go. Alright, that's going to do it for today. My chest is getting way too hot. If you're thinking of building this deck, please consider using our TCG Player affiliate link down in the description below. It helps the channel out, it helps us do cool and new and exciting things. If there's any other Marvel-based commanders you would like me to take a look at, let me know down in the comments. And as always, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Until next time, I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.